don't document it, it didn't happen. You know, it's just not there. So by the time we get around to, you know, writing the report at the end, if you can't show where you got information from and back up what you're saying, it's not going to get into the report. The editors are going to start looking at it, and the report writers, and, you know, they got to be able to use what's in there, and if you haven't provided it, they can't use it. So it's really important to get the stuff documented properly, make sure you cover what people say, represent it accurately and completely. You know, this slide's about, I think, in everybody's presentation, but for me, you know, when you do an interview, the documentation is what you're about to do, but when you start the thing, it's really important, as we said earlier, to get a rapport going, or, you know, get the interviewee comfortable. You know, they're going to talk to you a lot more if they're not feeling threatened. Almost nobody walks into an NTSB interview and is happy to be there. You know, either they've been involved in something really bad, or they're a witness to it, or something's going on. It's usually not a good thing for them. I do air traffic control stuff, and we do a lot of events where nobody got hurt. You know, they're just dumb things that happen, and, you know, procedural screw-ups, things like that. They could have been hazardous, so we go ahead and do an investigation on them. But we're usually talking to people who often, you know, nothing really, nobody got hurt, nobody got killed. It's just a bad event. Some of those, you know, controllers especially will come in and they're very uncomfortable because, you know, part of their job is to be self-assured and confident and all that stuff. And when they've messed up and they know it, they're not self-assured and confident. They tend to walk in kind of like, you know, because they know they've kind of gotten caught. And they'll come in and sit down. And I did a case a few years ago in Atlanta with a controller, tower controller, who was, you know, we did a little research on him. I consider this preparation for the interview. We talked to people that knew him when we got down there. You know, I try not to interview anybody on day one. First day we show up, we're not interviewing anybody if I can help it. We're going to do a little homework first. So we talked to the manager about this guy, and we talked to some of the other controllers and got a feel for him that he was really a very competent, sharp guy. I won't go through the whole event of what happened, but basically he launched an airplane at 7:57 and he shouldn't have cleared for takeoff. Well, he did. And the airplane took off about halfway down the runway at about 100 plus knots. The guy finally realized it was a mistake, canceled his takeoff clearance. So slams on the brakes, they blew all the tires, they had to bus all the passengers back to the terminal. Delta lost the airplane for the day because it needed maintenance. You know. So it wasn't a good event. And of course, the controller felt like a jerk. Well, I used to be a controller, been there, done that, felt stupid. So I know what the guy feels like. And when we're doing our interviews, everybody in the room is either a current or former controller. So when the guy comes in, you know, he's talking to people that have been there before. And it's good if you can get that across to them. You know, look, we really understand what you kind of feel like here, and we've done the job, we understand what's going on here. You try to make him feel comfortable. Well, in his case, because we knew he was a well-respected and, you know, good controller and things, when he came in, he looked really, really nervous and unhappy and uncomfortable. And he sat down, and we did this. You know, I went around the room, and I said, okay, here's who's here. You know, this guy, current controller, this is here. I worked at Oakland Center, you know, just to let you know we all understand the business. And he still didn't look real happy, and then we kind of, a little short pause, and I looked him straight in the eye and said, so what the heck were you thinking? And he cracked up. And from then on, it was just us, a bunch of controllers talking about this stupid event that happened. But it got him loosened up immediately. He didn't feel threatened anymore. It's like, you know, what the heck were you thinking? And he just laughed because he knew, yeah, I don't know what I was thinking. And he came back and he said, I don't know. And he just kind of went from there. We said, okay, so what happened? And he started with the whole thing, and he just laid it out. You know, we didn't need to ask him a lot of questions. He actually kind of wanted to, you know, dump it because he kind of felt bad in the first place. So just coming in there and getting him on that basis of, you know, feeling actually pretty good about it at that point. It was like, okay, I know I did something stupid. You guys know it was stupid. Let's talk. And we got the whole thing documented very well. It turned out pretty good. So you don't necessarily need to go, you know, very formal all the time. Not every case is appropriate like that, but for that one it worked well. Whoops, come back here. Big thing with interview notes is you want to make sure they're accurate. You know, there's no point in writing down stuff that's not true or incomplete. So try to be very careful to accurately reflect what is said. You don't want it to be ambiguous. You know, when you read the notes later, I've had cases where I've written something down that was very cryptic, and then, you know, the next day or 3 days later when I'm reading the notes, I'm trying to remember, oh, geez, what did he say there? And I can't document anymore what the guy actually said. I may have to go back to somebody else in the group and say, hey, do you remember what he said here? Did you write that down? Excuse me. So ultimately, you want to have the interview be kind of a good flow. You know, I try to have them read like a story. When the person starts, I try to get them to just tell the story. So generally, we go through the introductory bit, and I'll be talking to them. Okay, well, when was the first time you became aware of this airplane? Just something like that, just to get them to a point in time of, you know, when did you first become aware of this aircraft? Oh, I took the handoff from somebody else, and he checked on, I gave his altitude. Okay, then what happened after that? And they may give you a couple of sentences, and then they'll stop. Okay, then what'd you do then? And they'll keep going. And eventually, at some point, most of them, if they're trying to be a little bit economical with the facts, will finally go, well, do you just want me to just keep talking? You know, so once you get them to just keep talking, then we just say, okay, just tell me the story. And they just lay it out. And then at that point, you can go back and fill in details, and, you know, the other people on the group can ask other questions if they want to. But the big thing to me is if you can just get them talking, that's probably the best thing. They're going to tell you a lot if you can just get them out of that hole. The FAA pre-briefs everybody we talk to, and they usually tell them, you know, don't volunteer anything. That's the first thing they tell them. So they'll set them up for, you know, just answer the questions. And if you can get them out of that mode to where they're actually more interactive with you, it's going to work out a lot better in the long run. And it makes them a lot more comfortable too. And that's more like a normal conversation with somebody where they don't feel like they're being grilled. So if I can get them into that mode, that helps a lot. Then we're going to write that down. Readable narrative prose, as it says here. I try to write it down so when you read the notes, it reads like a story. You know, we're going to go back and take what the guy said and, you know, make it make sense. You know, as you do in a group, you may have other party members on the group and they're going to ask questions at the end. You don't have to rearrange it all, but if it makes a lot more sense to move those answers back up here because they fill in a hole, I do that later when I do the actual summary of the interview. I will go back and rearrange it so it chronologically makes sense. So you're not jumping back to a topic that's way back at the beginning when the second person starts asking questions. Now, the field notes, it's going to be pretty much as it happened. But you know, when you go to actually write the interview summary up, it makes a lot more sense to people to be able to put it all together in one picture and just read right through it. You don't have to rearrange it. You can if you want to, but you don't have to. We're not trying to do a transcript. This is not a court reporter. You know, you're trying to accurately reflect what the person said. So if you can achieve that without having to be a transcript, that's fine. You've succeeded. Be careful about using quotes around things unless it's exactly what they said. You know, a quote is a quote. It's verbatim. So if that's not what they said, don't make it look like it is. Most of the time, our notes are going to be a paraphrase. You know, the person goes out and rips out 3 or 4 sentences, and you can summarize that as, and then he told the airplane to turn left. You know, but maybe he said that in 4 or 5 sentences. Well, okay, but that's, you still accurately reflected the content of what he told you. You don't have to provide them a summary. It's important, though, to make sure that it does reflect what they said. And typically, if I have an interview where it's kind of complex, I will read it back to the guy at the end. I'll normally have 2 or 3 pages of notes, and with them sitting right there and the whole group right there, I'll go, okay, this is what I got. Just blow through it, kind of cover all the points with them sitting right there. And at that point, they can say, no, that's not what I meant, or if anybody else has any questions, they can chip in with that as well. But it's almost like giving them a copy later, but it's pretty much contemporaneous. And since you still got them sitting right there, you're going to get the answers back right away. The group members, if you've done that, shouldn't come back to you a month later when you send out the summary and go, wait, that's not what he said. Because not only did you read it back to the interviewee at the time, the group members were all sitting there too. So that's kind of your speak now or forever hold your peace thing. You know, you were there when I read it back to him. You didn't complain then that it wasn't accurate, so tell him a month later it's not accurate. I'm really not buying that. If they insist, though, you can always have them write a note, or you can put a note in the factual at the end, you know, footnote, by the way, the party member from yada yada said, you know, they thought he said this. Okay, that covers it, it's fair. You know, you don't have to agree with it, but at least it accounts for a disagreement, puts it into the report so people can't say you're hiding something or didn't listen to it. Some people put the interview summaries in as attachments to the report, to the factual. I usually put it all in one factual. I don't like going to chase attachments all over the place. I don't think we've got a clear policy on that. If some people do the attachments, some don't. I usually tell my guys that they're traffic people not to. We just put it all in one report. If somebody asks you for a copy of the factual at some point in the future, if you've got 18 attachments to it, you got to send them all of that stuff. You know, if it's already just all in one report, here's the factual, boom, you're done. So to me, it makes more sense to keep it all consolidated. But if you do the attachments, you may need to go back in later and add things to the, you know, if there's any tidbits that come up in the interviews, you may be able to put them back into the report. Make sure if you do have any abbreviations in the report that everybody knows what they are. You know, we had this little discussion this morning about OAS, which to NTSB people, OAS is Office of Aviation Safety, and we all know we work for it, but it was some other OAS that actually belonged to somebody else. Well, if you put OAS in the report, what are you really talking about? You know, there could easily have some misunderstanding there. Yes, sir?
Can you repeat, please, How do you come up with your interview summary?
The interview summary?
Yeah.
I write my notes typically. I read everybody else's notes, and anything that I didn't pick up originally, I pull out of their stuff and blend it together so that at the end you have one account that's essentially what everybody heard collectively. There are times when I don't have all the notes. One of my favorite little interview detours is once in a while if you're talking to somebody and you really get into it with them, you know, the discussion's really going well, or perhaps you're going back and forth a little bit, asking a lot of questions in a hurry because they're, you know, well, okay, you said this, what about that? There are times when it gets a little bit contentious with the, you know, depending on the interviewee. And a lot of times what will happen then is all of your group members kind of put down their pencils and they're just watching. You know? Well, I'm not writing notes anymore either because I'm talking to him and they're not writing notes either. At the end, you've had this whole discussion and nobody wrote it down. So I've actually had to kind of lean over my party members and go, keep writing, because they're all, hey, this is great, you know, no, right, you know, but you want to make sure somebody documents all of it. And then at the end, you're going to take everybody's notes. I usually have all the group members give me their notes when I go to do the final write-up of the summaries. So I've got my account of it, their account of it, their account of it, put all of that together, one big account. Then we feed that back to everybody before we go home to make sure that they've all read it and they all agree that I didn't, you know, misrepresent anything or leave anything out while we're still on scene. If we had to, we could go back to the interviewee and ask them again, but that's pretty rarely necessary to do it right.
And you do that for all the interviews you conduct?
Yep. Yeah. We want to make sure.
For instance, give us an instance. You know, I don't know how yours goes. Each of the incidents you launch for and all that. How many interviews do you find yourself doing in a day?
In a day?
Yes.
For us, we probably wouldn't do more than 4 or 5. 4 or 5 is a tough day. You know, our interviews don't tend to be that long though. Sometimes we'll get, you know, a 2-hour interview for us is pretty long. Yeah, I mean the pilot interviews, some of those go all day long. The ops guys go completely, you know, nuts. They'll spend all day on an interview. Ours don't tend to go that long, but if you try to do more than like aviation, yeah. In our case, you know, if we try to do more than 4 or 5 in a day, you know, your brain's turning to mush by the end. You're probably missing stuff. You're not, you know, you're not as effective as you should be. I mean, you have to consider your own fatigue too, as far as, you know, am I actually listening to this person, or are we just kind of going through the motions? Because by the time you've been listening to interviews all day long, I mean, at the end of the day, it's getting pretty tiring.
Scott,
Probably time to quit.
when do you do, after all those summaries that you put together, when do you write the summary?
I usually do the summaries the same night.
So you're up really late at night doing the
Yeah.
summaries?
Yeah, yeah. For me, I'm up. You know, I'm probably up till 10 or 11 at least, if not later, writing summaries. And the next day, those summaries are done for that day. We start over with the new interviews. I do those that night, and then the last day we're there, we get together and everybody does the notes, and that's when I kind of hand them the report and go, okay, here's the draft report I've got with all the summaries in it. You guys read it, compare it to what you had. Tell me if there's anything wrong. So
I think you might want to make clear, I'm not sure everyone grasped the concept that you do not record any interview.
that's true. We don't tape them.
So this is in place of a transcript or recording. This is not in addition to that, right?
Yeah, we don't, because we deal with the FAA, and the FAA is totally down on recording. I mean, we have like a 25-year-old MOU with the FAA that was signed by Donald Lingan, who died 15 years ago. But it says, you know, essentially they're going to treat a recorded interview as a deposition. So they want like 3 days notice, they want a lawyer there, they want, you know, they got to turn into a big circus if we're going to record it.
Okay.
So we don't typically record.
So you're right. Okay.
Yeah, we're just writing notes.
That makes it. That's what I wanted to find out how you do it.
Yeah, no, I didn't know you were asking about recording, but yeah, we're in kind of a unique situation because we're dealing with the FAA most of the time, and we've got this agreement that I would have personally never signed, but we have it and we're stuck with it. So, you know, at this point, we don't record. And it would be nice if we did, but it would cause a lot of issues with them the way they are right now. So in our unique situation, we don't record. AS-30, though, the pilots do. When the ops guys do interviews with a pilot, they do record. So it's not even consistent in our division. It's just basically because we're dealing with the FAA and they have their own attitude about recording. We don't do it.
Okay, thanks.
Let's see. Yeah. With this, The second bullet, I mean, you can either put it in the report or as an attachment to the report. Second bullet is if there's information in the interview summaries that you've made attachments, what they're talking about is you can pull stuff out of there and actually embed it in the actual main body of the report if it makes sense to do that. So if you pick up some information during the interview and it belongs, you know, it's something that belongs in the main report, go ahead and pull it out and put it in there, that's fine. You know, again, I try to have these things be as readable as possible. And to me, you know, attachments are distracting. It's kind of like footnotes. I hate footnotes. Because, you know, read, bounce, read, bounce, read, bounce. It's the same thing with attachments to me. You know, if you're talking about what somebody said in the factual, then you got to go find another file to go figure out what he actually said. To me, that's not easier. I'd rather have it all in one place than just read the whole story and we're done. Again, not required. Go ahead.
When you write your summary, what kind of format do you use? Are you using bullet points like a timeline, or are you using like I asked, he said, he stated?
No, I don't. Well, sometimes I don't even do as much of that. I mean, it might be Mr. Smith said he came to work at 4 o'clock. He was assigned to the local control position by the supervisor. He relieved the controller on duty at that point. The controller who was leaving informed him that the runway was closed because, you know.
So
like,
basically their narrative, but not the questions that you're asked.
Right.
You don't log that.
No. Not specifically. I mean, I might put in there, you know, when asked if, yada, yada, yada,
Okay.
if it was specific for a reason. But in general, if it's just kind of tell me your story, then I'm going to write down their story. And, you know, I kind of, again, I'm big on readability. I really kind of like the thing to just flow, you know. This is what we talked to him about, this is what he told us. Here's his account of what occurred. And, you know, I'm not too hung up on the he asked and responded, he asked, responded, he asked, responded.
Not necessarily a transcript of the whole interview, it's
Right.
what he stated occurred on that day.
Right. Yeah, I mean, to me, that works well. You read it, and it's kind of like, okay, I understand what he saw and did and why. And, you know, if you've got specific problems or specific issues that you really want to bring out, you might say, you know, the group asked if this happened or, you know, something, and he said this. But in general, if you just the general background stuff or just kind of, you know, tell me what happened. Write it all down.
Okay, so it's not required that we put down our, but whatever we have to do to tell the story.
Yeah, yeah. Because again, you're going to present that back to the group as, okay, this is what I got out of this. And if any of them disagree, they're going to tell you then, well, that's not what he said, or I think he said this too, or that kind of thing. Get that all fixed. But presumably by the time you're done, since everybody's got a shot at it, when you walk out the door at the end of the first part of the investigation, you should have a believable account of what everybody said that you all agree is believable. So at that point, you're in pretty good shape. I actually write my field notes like a draft factual. I use the factual format that I'm going to use down the road. I write them as a draft factual.
That makes it easier for you later.
Absolutely, yeah. I used to do like separate field notes, then I had to like do it all over again. I said, that's stupid. I'll just do it as a draft factual. When I'm done, I'll just go in and do a little editing and we're finished. So by the time we're done, I've got that done. And if I've got to make graphics or other things to do that, I do that while I'm out there too. So by the time I leave, I've got a draft factual report done. And then we can actually just, later on, I'm just doing a little bit of editing and tweaking and maybe adding a figure here and there or something, but I'm basically done when I'm gone. So for me, that works well. Okay. Again, you know, we do tell them it's public. There are people who think that the interviews are confidential. They're not. You know, this stuff's all going to go on the docket, and it's only fair to let them know that. You know, sometimes it's a surprise. They've got a notion that it's all confidential, and it's not. So when they're going to show up in the docket a year later, sometimes it's a surprise. I'm not convinced that identifying people is really a good thing. I mean, you may recall a mid-air Uberlingen a few years back with a cargo aircraft and a Russian plane that had a bunch of kids on it going home. Well, the controller got identified in the report, and one of the parents showed up about a year later and killed him. So it's, you know, he actually turned up at the guy's house and stabbed him. So, you know, sometimes getting identified as associated with an accident is not a good thing. But, you know, we do put the names right in there. It's not that hard to find people anymore. They can go on the internet and find almost anybody without too much effort. So all they really need is a name and an approximate location. So, but, you know, we do make it public and it is in there, so it's good to let them know. When we turn up at a place, remember I said we don't interview anybody on day one? The reason I'm not talking to anybody on day one is if I can help it. I mean, we'll do it if they're like going on 3 weeks leave the next day or something, but short of that, I don't want to talk to them on the first day we get there. The reason is because we're going to look at all this recorded data. In our case, the FAA's got tons of recorded stuff. They got radar data, they got tapes recorded, you know, voice communications and things. There's all kinds of other documentation. I want to look at that before I ever talk to this person, because I want to basically have my act together before I talk to them.